Welcome back to the Dershow. Well, my reputation as Nostradamus or Nostra Dershowitz has survived. I predicted against all odds the outcome of the Eagles Chiefs game, and I predicted how they would do it. What I said is the Eagles would win on defense. I predicted that both teams would have defenses that would knock out the stars, and they did. Obviously, Mahomes did nothing without even any sacks. He was without even any attempts to get him. They sacked him more times than he's ever been sacked in his career. But they also got Barkley. And so neither star did anything, and Kelsey didn't do anything. This was not a game of stars. Of course, Hurd did very well and got the MVP, but the three people that everybody came to see did nothing. They did nothing because the defense was so good. And my prediction was that football is a game of defense, and the Eagles have phenomenal defense. Obviously they have good offense too, but Mahomes was really caught flat-footed. He didn't have the kind of protection that the Eagles front line has, and so my son, the producer, who's a great football fan, didn't even stay to watch the second half. Neither did President Trump. So Elon, you and President Trump have something in common. You left after the first half. He to fly back and you to have a really good meal. And I promised you I wouldn't tell you what the outcome was, but you knew what the outcome was going to be. It was determined by the first half. I always think a game can't be determined by the first half, because if a team could do something in the first half, the second team obviously technically could do it in the second half. But that's not what happened. I was rooting for the Eagles, and I was happy it happened. I know Jeff Lurie, and I know some of the other people, and so good day for Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the place where the United States Constitution was written. In fact, the Eagles won not too far away. Obviously, they didn't win in Philadelphia, but they won many of their games in a stadium not too far away from where Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence on a desk built for him by a slave. All men are created equal, except not my slaves. But that's another issue. But I want to talk a little bit about the Constitution in Philadelphia today. I want to be very clear. The New York Times had a front page story, major story. Typically, all the law professors in the world, the entire academy, all the law professors think there's a horrible constitutional crisis going on. Of course, they interviewed 3 or 4 left-wing anti-Trump law professors. They didn't introduce anybody who would have a neutral view of the Constitution, and they didn't give their readers an honest assessment of the issue. There is no constitutional crisis. Take it from me. I've been studying the Constitution for close to 70 years now. I know a thing about the Constitution. The United States has a system of checks and balances. That system is designed to prevent constitutional crises. The Democrats are crying wolf. Schumer screaming out there like a mad person about a constitutional crisis. People talking about going to the streets and war. No. Almost from the time the Constitution was written, there have been disagreements. Jefferson takes office. The difference between Jefferson and Trump is this. Jefferson ran on a platform of a weak presidency. We think everything should be decided by the states, by the legislatures. Weak presidency. He had been the governor, wartime governor of Virginia, very much a states' rights person, or a states' power person, to be more accurate. And he ran on the promise, if I'm elected president, I'm not going to be an activist president. I'm going to be much more passive than Washington and Adams. I'm not going to pass laws like the Alien and Sedition laws. I'm not going to do those kinds of things at all. And he gets into office and he looks around and he says, for the country to work, a president really has to be strong and innovative and bold. You know what I'm going to do? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fire all the Federalists in the government. I don't like the Federalists. They're anti-democratic. Remember, Jefferson's party was called, ironically, the Democrat-Republican Party, Republican-Democrat Party, as distinguished from the Federalist Party. The Federalists were Alexander Hamilton, Adams, and Washington, the people who wanted a less activist, central, they wanted a strong central government, less activist states. And the anti-federalists, the Republicans, Democrats, states power and states' interests, and more of an interest in democracy. Hamilton, Adams, and Washington were more in favor of a republic, as Franklin said, if you can and keep it. And so Jefferson campaigns on the pledge of a weak presidency, comes in, fires the Federalists, creates a tremendous conflict with the Supreme Court, whose Chief Justice is his cousin, John Marshall, refuses to accept some of the midnight judges that the Federalists had appointed Adams on the way out, leading to Marbury versus Madison in 1803, and then does the boldest thing a president has ever done, probably in the history of the country. He doubles the size of the country. He buys Greenland. No, I forgot it wasn't Greenland. No, it wasn't Greenland. It was New Orleans and an enormous part of the country. And he does it by executive order. He negotiates. He gets a price. Congress won't pay the price. He says, hey, I'm the president. I'm buying it, pays the money, doubles the size of the country, and we become the America we are today. That's Thomas Jefferson. You know what else he did? He had tariffs. He didn't call them tariffs, but he imposed boycotts on trade with England and France because he was having disagreements with them. So he used the power of the purse that the president has. I mean, Jefferson's days in office are more reminiscent of Trump's days in office than they are of first days in office of most other presidents. By the way, Franklin Delano Roosevelt took enormous powers, and some Republicans said, oh my God, this is a constitutional crisis. When Andrew Jackson refused to enforce a decision of the Supreme Court involving Native American rights, he said, we're not sure if he ever said it, but it's attributed to him, Chief Justice Marshall has issued an order, now let him enforce it. Now that's a constitutional crisis, but it was resolved. We have a system for resolving constitutional crises. Most other countries don't. We have a system of governance in which the three major branches of government, and there are only three, the bureaucracy is not a branch of the government, three major branches of the government, the executive. One person is the executive. One person, the president, not even the vice president. The president is the executive. He is the unitary, solitary executive. Then there's the legislative branch, Congress, House of Representatives, the Senate. And then there's the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court and inferior courts, as the Congress may legislate. And those three branches conflict with each other. And that's what the framers had in mind. They didn't want a smooth government. If they wanted a smooth government, they'd have replicated what they were used to, a parliamentary system. One central authority. No executive. The executive is the prime minister, the first minister of the legislature. No judiciary. The judiciary of the House of Lords, which is part of the parliament. Now, that's changed a little bit, too. Of course, they used to have a king. The king used to have some power. Now the king has virtually no power. But we opted out of the parliamentary system. We were the first democracy that established what Montesquieu, who Jefferson had studied. Jefferson was an amazing student of Europe, and Madison was too. And so they created the system of checks and balances, separation of powers, so you don't have all the power of government in one unit. In fact, when Tocqueville came to America to study America, his first question was, "This is the weirdest government. Where does sovereignty lie? Is sovereignty in the president? Is sovereignty in the legislature? Is sovereignty in the judiciary, and he couldn't figure out the answer. Well, there's a simple answer. Sovereignty is with the people. And the process of checks and balances is the sovereignty. No, the president isn't sovereignty. He's not the king. No, the legislature is not parliament. He's not. And no, the judiciary. We're not a government of the judiciary. You know what the Bible said. When judges ruled the land, there was famine. We don't want a system in which judges make policy. Oh, everybody loves it when judges make policy their way, but that's not a system of governance. So we have a system of separation of powers and checks and balances. That's the sovereignty of the United States of America, and it has worked. It has worked for 234 years, if my counting is correct, and it's had its ups and downs. We needed a civil war. We could not resolve the issue of slavery, as Jefferson wrote shortly before he died. We have the tiger, meaning slavery, by the tail, and the wolf. No, he said I got it wrong. Sorry, I apologize. We have the wolf by the ears, is what he said. If we hold on to it, he will turn around and devour us. If we let him go, he will devour us. If we kick it down the road, he will devour our grandchildren. Remember, people forget that Thomas Jefferson was a very, very complicated man. He owned 150 or more slaves, but he was against slavery as an institution. He tried to put it in the Declaration of Independence. The slave owners kept it out, but as one of the complaints about Great Britain was that the king has allowed slavery to come to the shores of the United States. He was against it, but he also wanted to live a good life. And so in order to keep his wine and his books and his Monticello home, he kept his slaves and didn't free them the way Washington and so many other Virginia slave owners did. But nobody said it would be easy. And nobody ever said that our system of checks and balances would make it easy to govern or would make it efficient to govern. No. The design of our system of checks and balances was to create enough power to govern effectively, while at the same time denying any one part of our government enough power to create a tyranny. And so we have to count on our system of checks and balances, and it's working even today as we speak. The president issues executive order after executive order after executive order. What do the states do? They get their attorneys general to bring a lawsuit. They search all over the country for the best judges. They handpick the judges. They file the lawsuits. And you get judges saying, no, Mr. President, you can't do that. And so you get a single judge for about an hour being able to stop the president from doing something. I say an hour metaphorically, it could be days. But ultimately, those issues are brought up to the Court of Appeals and eventually to the Supreme Court. And it will be resolved, and the president will obey. He wouldn't do what Andrew Jackson did, saying the Chief Justice has made the ruling, now let him enforce it. President Trump has never defied a court order, and he has indicated that he would comply with court orders. But he needs to know that he has the right to appeal these court orders, and many of them will be found to be improper, and that the courts don't have the power to stop this or stop that. And people keep forgetting the bureaucracy, the alphabet agencies, they are not an independent branch. They are part of the executive, and the executive is the president. Now, it's complicated because Congress created many of these agencies. For example, some of the Federal Communications Commission, Federal Security, Federal Drug, those are created by Congress, but they're part of the executive department. Some of the people are confirmed by Congress, and so the argument is you can't fire them. Only Congress can unconfirm them, but that's never been the rule. For example, the head of the FBI is confirmed, and all cabinet members are confirmed by the Senate, yet the president can fire any of those heads of agencies at his whim. He doesn't even have to have a reason for doing it. Now, Congress also passed civil service legislation, which guarantees tenure, at least during good behavior, to certain people in certain jobs that are deemed to be non-political. And so, these are complicated issues, the kind of courses that I taught for years and years and years and years. And yet these loudmouth congressmen and senators come in and try to persuade the American public, this is simple. President can't do that. No, it's not simple. It's not simple. It's very complex. And it requires resolution through the courts. It requires fact-finding. It requires knowledge of the administrative agencies and their actions. And it requires application of laws that have been developed over 200 and some odd years. We're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. You all know the amazing fact that on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, both major authors of the Declaration of Independence, died on the same day, Jefferson a few hours before Adams. And so that was 200 and almost 50 years ago. But we didn't have a constitution until years later. And we had an original constitution. It didn't work, the Articles of Confederacy. And then, there was a draft of the Constitution. Jefferson was in Paris, Madison and Hamilton, opposing points of view. Hamilton, again, the Federalist, Adams, Madison, the Jeffersonian, were two major drafters of the Constitution, and the major drafters, along with John Jay, of the Federalist Papers, which is the most authoritative interpretation and understanding of the Constitution. I've read every word of the Federalist Papers, and I've read every word of the debates, not every state. I read a lot of the state debates, but of the federal debate about the Constitution. And I have a pretty good idea of what the framers had in mind, and they were not perfect. Constitution is not the Bible. It wasn't written by God, if you believe that God wrote every word of the Bible. No, it was written by fallible human beings who were looking out to Europe and worrying that what was happening in France might happen in the United States. And so they didn't want to have a pure democracy. They thought democracy was a dirty word that France was experiencing. So they established a republic, a complicated republic, very complicated. And the framers had very complicated notions, and they didn't answer all the hard questions. And then the Constitution itself was not deemed sufficient by some of the states, and they conditioned signing it on having a Bill of Rights, because Alexander Hamilton didn't think you needed a Bill of Rights, because the Constitution itself didn't give Congress the power to censor speech or establish a religion. So what do you need to say it? Well, belt and suspenders, one. And the framers put in the Bill of Rights, not the clearest document you've ever seen. The 9th and 10th Amendments are not the models of clarity. Neither is the 4th Amendment. Neither is the 2nd Amendment. For some of you, the 2nd Amendment is as clear as it can be. For me, it's a little bit more ambiguous. But that's our text. That's what the framers gave us to interpret. And Hamilton wanted the text to endure forever. Jefferson had a different view. He said democracy can survive only if the blood of tyrants and the blood of revolutionaries are spilled every generation or so. He was wrong, and Hamilton was right. And the Constitution has endured beyond any constitution in the history of humankind. It needed a civil war. You could not resolve the issue of slavery through the courts. They tried, and the courts behaved abysmally. They wrote the Dred Scott decision, which was a cause of the Civil War, not the only cause, but a major cause. It became clear that without a fight and without a victory of the North and the 14th and 13th and 15th Amendments, you couldn't resolve the issue of slavery. Look, the Civil War might not have happened. The Civil War was started in some respects by accident. They came to rearm Fort Sumter, and the North thought the rearming was more than it was, and shots were fired. In the first shots, nobody was killed. And you could easily imagine that there might have been a different result of the Civil War. And indeed, the result of the Civil War could easily have been that the South would be allowed to secede. Remember, the framers of the secession borrowed Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. You read the Secession Proclamation, It's almost the same as the secession proclamation that the United States did from England, but that didn't happen. And the South went to war and lost the war. And as the result of it, slavery ended. The Equal Protection Clause was instituted, and we became a different country. And we've had that only one revolution. Early on in times, there was this Farmers' Revolution and that Debtors' Revolution, Shays' Revolt and all those revolts you learn in high school history. That didn't amount to much. Interestingly enough, Jefferson supported the revolters instead of the governments in power. You go back to American history, it's so absolutely dense and loaded and filled with nuance. And yet, Schumer gets up there and he knows the Constitution. He was a student at Harvard Law School. He must know the Constitution. He doesn't know the Constitution. Declaring this a constitutional crisis and somehow thinking that this is an appropriate occasion to go on the streets and to go to war, it's just wrong. My prediction is we'll have 4 tumultuous years with a very strong president, and we'll see what happens in the midterms. Maybe we'll see a divided government again. Maybe we won't. Nobody can predict that at this point. But that's part of our system of checks and balances, elections every 2 years for Congress. It's part of our system of checks and balances that some judges and justices will die or retire, and others will replace them. And we'll see a constant conflict between the 3 branches. The struggle for liberty never stays won. And the struggle for democracy never stays won, and the struggle for governance is never over. It's always a series of tensions. We've gone through some periods of time. Bill Clinton, he had 8 years of relative calm. And, Ronald Reagan did some great things, of course, the end of the Soviet Union. So we've had presidencies which have been relatively calm. I predict, and here, Nostra Dershowitz again, I'm predicting it, the 4 years of Trump will not be easy, passive years, because we're going to see President Trump assert maximalist presidential power. He's going to be going down in history, along with Hamilton and others, as somebody who thought that the primary power of running a government should lie with the executive, with the president of the United States in the White House. And we're going to see on the other side, right now, we see a very weak legislative leadership on the Democratic side. How many people even know who the Democratic leaders of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and the Democratic leader of the House are, and the name of the new party chairman? I don't even remember his name. He got elected a week ago and has already disappeared from view. So, but we're going to have clashes, but it is not a constitutional crisis. Our Constitution was designed to avert crises, to throw them into the process of checks and balances. That's exactly what's happening. And so if you're a student of history and if you're a student of government, watch the government now. This is a perfect illustration of what our framers had in mind. So we shouldn't be bemoaning the conflicts that are occurring now in between the executive, legislature, and the judicial branches. We should be applauding them and understanding this is America. This is America. This is what the Constitution was designed to prevent a crisis, and designed to prevent tyranny, and designed to prevent any one branch from getting too much power. And so far it's working. If it stops working, I'm going to be the first to call it out. And I'm going to be the first to call for, change if change is necessary. But we've done it pretty well for almost 2 1/3 centuries. And I predict we will get through this, and we will get through it with strength. That's at least my hope. I support whoever the president is. I support whoever the government is. I want to see America be as strong as it possibly can, but be as strong as it can without veering in any way away from democracy, republic, and toward tyranny. And I'm confident that our institutions are capable of striking that very difficult but essential balance. Okay, so let's see. You've heard my little lecture on constitutional law. Let's see what the letters bring. This is an interesting one. Even if Trump's plans work out perfectly, this is talking about Gaza and Ukraine, there is no chance at all he will give him the Nobel Peace Prize. That prize has become nothing more than a sad joke. You're absolutely right. The Nobel Peace Prize, when Elie Wiesel got it, it was really worth something. I mean, what a person to have survived the Holocaust and devoted his whole life to making sure it never happened again and bringing about peace and going all over the world and acting for peace. That was great. And then they gave it to Obama. And that's the first thing that made a joke out of it. They gave it to Obama. And then they've given it to Doctors Without Borders. It's Doctors Without Morality. These are not Doctors Without Borders. They're not doctors. First of all, most of the people in it aren't even doctors. They are left-wing, progressive, hard anti-American, hard left political people who use their medical licenses to achieve their political goals. They are worse than a joke. They are an evil organization, Doctors Without Borders. There are people in it who are doing good jobs, people who naively think they can go and join Doctors Without Borders and maybe cure people. Okay, that's fine, but that's not what Doctors Without Borders do. They side with tyrants. They side against liberty and democracy. So that was another joke. Giving President Carter, a peace prize. He did more to hurt peace in the Middle East than help peace in the Middle East, even though he helped bring about with the help of others, the Egyptian, Israeli. But he didn't get it for that. He didn't get it for that. It was years and years later. He got it for banging nails into houses and making trouble all over the world. He didn't get it when he did good. He got it when he did bad. My favorite is the European Union gets the Nobel Peace Prize. That's my second favorite. The United Nations got the Peace Prize. The United Nations, which has done more to promote warfare and conflict than any organization, gets the Nobel Peace Prize. So, if I were President Trump, I wouldn't be opting for a peace prize. He's not going to get it. Another group that got the Nobel Peace Prize, a group headed by a man named Denis Mukwege and Nacho Marad, who did good work in trying to prevent rape and sexual assault from being used as a weapon of war. That was great. Then comes October 7th, and have we heard from them? Have we really heard much from them? These are the people who won the Nobel Peace Prize for opposing the use of rape as a weapon of war. And then on October 7th, rape becomes a primary tactic in the war against Israel. And they both issued little, minor statements. On the one hand, on the other hand. But where have they been? They have not been doing very much on behalf of preventing. So it really, for them and for so many others, it's not that rape is a terrible thing. It depends on who's raped and who does the raping. And that's horrible. That's horrible. And that's what the Nobel Peace Prize has become, unfortunately. Maybe it'll be restored. Maybe we'll see it given for the right reasons. I nominated the people who brought about the Abraham Accords for the Peace Prize. And I'm one of the nominators because I'm a professor of public law. Totally ignored and gave it to somebody who I'd never even heard of. International law is hypocrisy on sticks. Best opinion I've heard about international law. It is. I mean, international law is made up by academics. It has no basis in experience, in real values. It's not enforceable for the most part. You have treaties. Those are contracts between countries. But a conventional international law, international common law, is, and this is not me, this is, I think Jeremy Bentham coined the term that international law is hypocrisy on sticks. I like this one too. Appeasers are like people who feed alligators, hoping they will be the last ones eaten. And there are too many appeasers out there. And so, in order to enforce morality and enforce justice, you have to be tough and you have to have a single standard. You can't make it vary with who the alleged assailants and who the alleged victims are. This is one that I get lots of times. You can, as an attorney, choose not to represent a client as not guilty if you know he's guilty. And he says, I think people have an issue with you. OJ's team knew he was guilty, yet they represented him as if he were not guilty. What happened in that case was many on the OJ Simpson defense team felt that the police had framed possibly a guilty man. and they had tampered with the evidence. And that's what defense lawyers do too. If defense lawyers all chose not to defend people who might be guilty, there would be no defense lawyers in the world, because statistically, most people who are charged with crime are in fact guilty. And it's just as important to represent the guilty as the innocent. I think in some parts of the country, there's a 97% conviction rate. So that means statistically, everybody is guilty. And that means nobody should have representation. And the rate would go up from 97% to 99% if that happened. So it's very important that defense attorneys represent both the guilty and the innocent. You never heard anybody on the OJ defense team or on any defense team turn to the jury and say, look, it's my personal opinion that my client is innocent. That's not what you do. You challenge the evidence. You challenge the constitutionality of how the evidence was achieved. That's what has been done since the time that John Adams defended the people who were accused of the Boston Massacre and got some of them acquitted and some of them convicted. But he was the first great American lawyer to do that. Probably some before him, but not as well known. The lawyer who defended John Peter Zenger on free speech grounds also is in that pantheon of great lawyers, and those are people that I aspire to emulate. So, we live in a complicated world, and don't simplify. Don't just accept what the polemicists on the partisan left or the partisan right throw at you. Think about things carefully and understand the complexity of our system of government. We'll talk about that more, I'm sure, in the days to come. See you tomorrow.